Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to unpack one of the most critical documents in all of company law, the Articles of Association. So, what is it? Well, think of it as the internal constitution for a company, the official rulebook that dictates its entire day-to-day life. If you're studying corporate law, getting a grip on the articles isn't just a good idea, it's absolutely essential to understanding how a company actually works.
Okay, so here's the game plan. We'll kick things off by defining what the articles are. Then we'll put them head-to-head with the Memorandum of Association to see the difference. After that, we'll look at how they're actually written, the super important rules about changing them, and their power as a contract. And we'll wrap up by tackling two huge legal doctrines that define how the articles impact people on the outside of the company. All right, let's start at the very beginning. What in the world are the Articles of Association, or the AOA as you'll often see it? Let's nail down a clear definition and really understand its role in the corporate food chain. At its heart, the AOA is the blueprint for how a company manages itself internally. Now, for your exams, you absolutely need to know this. Section 2, subsection 5 of the Indian Companies Act of 2013 defines the articles as the rules that were either framed when the company was born or changed over time. It's basically the detailed operational manual, spelling out everything from the powers of directors to the procedure for board meetings. But here's the real kicker, and this is a critical legal point. The articles aren't just a friendly list of suggestions. The Supreme Court made it crystal clear in the case of Narendra Sanio versus the Calcutta Stock Exchange. The articles form a legally binding contract. And it's a three-way deal. It binds the company to its members, it binds the members to the company, and, this is the interesting part, it binds the members to each other. That's what that Latin term inter se means.
Now, you can't really understand the articles without talking about its big brother, the Memorandum of Association, or MOA. The best way to think about it is this. The MOA is the company's charter, and the AOA is its internal rulebook. Let's break down exactly what that means.
This table really lays it all out, so let's walk through it. The MOA sets the big, uncrossable boundaries, the playground the company can operate in. The AOA then sets the rules for how to play inside that playground, and this creates a clear hierarchy. The MOA is the boss. The articles can never overrule it. That's why changing the MOA is a huge pain, often needing government approval, while the articles are much easier to change. Now, zoom in on that last point because this is a classic exam question. If a company does something outside the scope of its MOA, that act is ultra-virus, beyond the powers, and it's totally void. You can't fix it. But if an act just breaks an internal rule in the AOA, the shareholders can usually vote to approve it after the fact.
And if you want a perfect summary of that hierarchy, look no further than this quote from Lord Cairns in the landmark case Ashbury Railway Carriage and Iron Company v. Richet. The memorandum is the boundary fence. The articles are the rules for how you live your life inside that fence. It's a simple but incredibly powerful way to remember the relationship.
So the MOA is the boss, we get that. But things get a little more nuanced. The courts will read both documents together if there's any confusion. For example, in the South Durham Brewery case, the MOA didn't say anything about different types of shares, but the AOA allowed them. The court said, okay, the AOA can be used to clarify the MOA's silence. But, and this is a big but, this only works to fill a gap. If the MOA is crystal clear, like it was in the Duncan Gilmore case, any rule in the articles that contradicts it is just ignored. A clear MOA always wins.
Okay, so we know what the articles do, but what's actually in them, and how do they become a real legal document? Let's dive into the nuts and bolts of how they're made.
I mean, look at this list. The articles cover pretty much the entire operational life of a company. It's all in there. The details of share capital, shareholder rights, how shares are allotted or even taken away. It spells out how directors are appointed, what they can and can't do. It covers how meetings are run, how votes are counted, how profits are shared, all the way to the procedures for shutting the whole company down. It's incredibly thorough.
Now, here's a really interesting concept that came in with the 2013 Act: entrenchment. A company can choose to entrench certain rules in its articles. What that means is they make those specific rules extra hard to change. So instead of needing a special resolution, an entrenched clause might require, say, a unanimous vote from every single member. It's a powerful way to protect core principles of the company from being easily changed by a future majority. And when it comes to private companies, the law gets super specific. To even be a private company under Section 268, your articles must, and that's the key word, include 3 specific restrictions.
You have to restrict the right to transfer shares. You have to limit the number of members, and you have to completely forbid asking the general public to buy your shares. These 3 rules are what legally make a private company private. Finally, to make the articles legally real when the company is formed, they have to be properly signed. Every founding member or subscriber has to sign it, and their signature has to be witnessed. The rules even cover what to do if a subscriber can't write or if one of the founders is another company. It's all about making sure the document is legally solid from day one. All right, we know what the articles are and how they're born, but businesses change, right? So their rules have to change too. This next section on alteration is huge, especially for exams, because while companies have a lot of power to change their articles, that power is definitely not unlimited. So the basic rule coming straight from Section 14 of the Companies Act is that a company can change its articles by passing a special resolution. The key thing to remember here is that this is a statutory right. As the court decided in Walker v. London Tramway Company, a company can't give up this power. It can't put a clause in its own articles saying, "We will never change this rule." The right to change is built into its DNA. But, and it's a very big but, that statutory right comes with a whole bunch of strings attached. An alteration can't break the rules of the Memorandum or the Companies Act. It can't make something illegal legal. And it can't defy a court order. But those last 2 points on the slide, that's where all the legal drama happens. The change must be genuinely for the good of the company as a whole, and it can't be used by the majority to bully the minority. Let's see how that works in a real case. In Allen v. Gold Reefs, a company changed its articles to get a lien, or a claim, on fully paid-up shares. This was targeted at one specific shareholder who owed the company money. Now, you'd think that's unfair, right? But the court said the alteration was valid. Why? Because it was done in good faith for the benefit of the company, to help it get its money back. The court ruled that was okay, even though it hit one specific person pretty hard. Now, let's look at the flip side with this case. Here, the majority shareholders wanted to get rid of the small minority. So they passed an alteration that would force anyone to sell their shares if 90% of the members asked them to. The court slammed the brakes on this one. It said, hold on, this isn't for the benefit of the company, it's just a power grab by the majority. It was seen as a clear case of oppressing the minority, and so it was declared invalid. See the difference? And the list of limits goes on. You can't just decide to turn a public company into a private one. That needs the tribunal's okay. An alteration also can't work backwards in time. It's only valid from the day it's passed. And here's a really critical one we're about to dive into. You can't alter your articles just to get out of a contract you already signed with someone else. This case, Southern Foundries v. Sherlaw, is the perfect, if a bit tricky, illustration of that point. A company had a managing director, Sherlaw, on a 10-year contract. Then the company got bought out, and the new owners changed the articles to give themselves the power to fire any director. So they fired Sherlaw. The court's decision here was so smart. It said, look, the alteration itself was valid. The company has the right to change its articles. So the firing was also technically valid under the new rules. However, by firing him, the company breached the 10-year contract it had with him. So while they could fire him, they still had to pay him damages. You can change your internal rules, but you can't escape the financial consequences of your contracts. We've been saying the articles are contract, so now let's really pull that thread. Who exactly is bound by this contract and to whom? It creates this fascinating web of legal relationships inside the company. First up, let's look at the flow of obligation from the members to the company they own a piece of. Okay, so every single member is on the hook to follow the rules in the articles, just as if they personally signed every page. This means the company can enforce those rules against them. In Borland's trustee, for example, the articles said if a member went bankrupt, their shares had to be sold to other members at a price the directors decided. When that happened, the bankrupt member's representative argued it wasn't fair. The court said, too bad. He owned the shares subject to the articles, and those were the rules he agreed to. But hey, it's not a one-way street. The contract works the other way too. The company is also bound to its members. This means that members can actually sue the company to make it follow its own rules. The classic case here is Wood v. Odessa Waterworks. The articles said dividends would be paid. Simple enough, right? But the company tried to pay the dividends with debt notes instead of cash. A shareholder took them to court, and the court sided with the shareholder, saying paid means paid in cash. The company was forced to respect the members' rights as laid out in the articles. And now for the third and maybe most interesting side of this triangle, the relationship between the members themselves.
The articles also act as a contract between the members on matters related to their rights as shareholders. Check out this case, Rayfield v. Hand. The articles had a rule that said the directors had to buy the shares of any member who wanted to sell. When a member tried to sell, the directors, who were also members, said no. The court stepped in and forced them to buy the shares. It said that specific article created a personal obligation between them, not as directors, but simply as fellow members of the company. All right, for our final section, we're stepping outside the company's front door. How does this internal rulebook affect outsiders, like banks, suppliers, or even employees? This brings us to two of the most important and frequently tested doctrines in all of company law. Before we even get to the doctrines, you have to burn this rule into your brain. The articles do not create a contract with an outsider. Period. Even if that outsider's name is written right there in the articles. The classic case is Eiley v. Positive Government Security Life Assurance Co. The articles named Mr. Eiley as the company's solicitor for life. Later, the company stopped using him and he sued, pointing to the articles. The court shut him down, saying the articles only created rights for him in his role as a member, not as a solicitor. His contract as a solicitor had to be a separate document. Okay, doctrine number one. Since the articles are filed with the government, they're public documents. And because they're public, the law has a pretty harsh rule called the doctrine of constructive notice. It presumes that anyone dealing with the company has already read the articles and understands them. So you can't later say, oh, I didn't know about that rule. The law's response is, well, you should have. It puts the burden of knowledge squarely on the outsider. Now, you can probably see the problem here. This rule could make doing business almost impossible. Sure, an outsider can read that the directors need to pass a resolution before taking a loan, but how on earth is the outsider supposed to know if that meeting actually happened? Are they supposed to barge into the boardroom and check the minutes? It's just not practical. And this is where the courts developed a brilliant solution, the doctrine of indoor management, also famously known as the Turquoise Rule. This rule acts as a counterbalance. It says that while outsiders need to know what's in the public documents, they are entitled to assume that all the internal, behind-the-scenes procedures have been followed correctly. They don't have to snoop around the company's indoor management. So in the original Turquoise case, a bank was allowed to assume that an internal resolution had been passed, and the company had to repay the loan. But, and you knew there'd be a but, this protection for outsiders isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. There are major exceptions. The rule won't help you if you actually knew something was wrong. It offers zero protection against forgery, because a forged document is just worthless. It also won't help if the deal was so fishy that you should have been suspicious. And finally, you can't claim you were relying on the articles if you never even bothered to read them in the first place. So I'll end with this question for you to really think about. What's the relationship between these two big doctrines? Well, they're basically two sides of the same coin. Constructive notice protects the company from outsiders who don't do their homework. The doctrine of indoor management protects honest outsiders from being punished for things they couldn't possibly know. Together, they create a delicate legal balancing act, making sure that business can happen without putting either the company or innocent third parties at an unfair disadvantage. Nailing that balance is what this part of company law is all about.